is Wayne Eaves, who works part-time at the warehouse and also does lots of debriefing work around urbanism and cities. And so Wayne will be speaking to us, and the title of his talk is Reflections of a Wandering Pilgrim. Please welcome Wayne.
Wow. A middle-aged, white, heterosexual male with a microphone. Said nobody ever. So I'm going to talk about Christianity as an oppressive, invisible structure. Radical self-care requires that we are willing to critique the things that we love, to grow who we are, and to be willing to challenge the systems that surround us. I love my faith enough to not want it to any longer be stuck within the bounds of an empire that subjugates and continues to drive the poor into the ground. Spanish anarchist and atheist Bonaventura Durruti said, "The only church that illuminates is a burning church." And I think many young people today would probably agree with that statement. We have built a passive faith, a faith that has told people that the great beyond is what they must strive for, that one day they will pass into the great beyond and be rewarded with mansions and streets of gold, while children drown in pit latrines and women have their breasts chopped off and their lips chopped off with machetes. Much of what takes place that builds and maintains those kind of theologies takes place in a lot of our suburban churches. And I say that in the middle of suburbia, where I probably had more security cameras looking at me on the way in than anywhere I've been in a very long time. And I live in suburbia. But what happens is it's suburban theology, and also a lot of suburban churches that plant their model into places of pain. It maintains a very specific suburban Christianity. So as you can see, there's a man at a pyre, and it says, "You do make some very good points, though." Phil Berrigan, the Jesuit priest and activist, said, "The poor tell us who we are, and the prophets tell us who we could become. So we hide the poor, and we kill the prophets." I am acutely aware that we have learned how to hide the poor behind programs. So we build NGOs and we outsource our work so that we don't have to get our hands dirty. And we've relegated prophecy to somebody in the back row has a back pain. I see that hand, Brett. Hallelujah, you're healed. But what we do is, over the last 5 years, my boys would be loving that right now. Over the last 5 years, I've walked with a lot of young people who've either been asked to leave churches or chose to leave churches because the questions that they had, the hard questions, had no space to be asked or to be answered. So they were consistently sidelined. And in some cases, some of them were told, "You do make a very good point, though." Okay, dogma. I'm going to read this quote from Peter Rowland. It says, "Not only this, but churches are ideological in that they create their own constellation of beliefs and practices that tell their congregants how to think and behave. A denomination, for instance, will offer dogmas, doctrines, and rituals that to a greater or lesser extent let everyone know how to interact with the world." One of the most common things that I hear from churches is the line that we do life together. We do life together provided you follow our rules, stick to the program, obey our power structures, and play really nicely with everybody else. If you don't, well, I'm afraid you're just not certain enough about your faith. You need a little more certainty, or the veil of certainty, so that at least you can stay within the bounds of what is acceptable and makes you a good Christian. And for many people, we stay there because of ourselves, because who we are, our ego requires affirmation. And that affirmation tells us that I need to belong. And the sense of belonging often overrides our desire to question. But I think that's changing. And I think it's changing very fast. The sin of certainty. So that second point should actually have something else in it. Why do inanimate objects appear more important than people? Should be a question that goes along with this. I heard so many Christian people over the course of the last 2 years talking about, well, why are the buildings on fire? Why did people destroy paintings? There was never a point where I heard people ask the question about, who are you? Why are you doing this? What is inside that is taking place that's causing this to happen? And Christianity has consistently pushed at the boundaries of civility, because we must all be civil and we must be civilized and we must play nicely. We must go to Bible study. And that doesn't answer the questions for so many young people especially. It doesn't answer the questions of doubt. And sometimes I think we're too busy focusing on the coffee, right? So thanks for the coffee. And I actually mean that quite sincerely. I worked with the homeless for a while. And on some Sunday mornings, that cup of coffee was the face of Jesus to them. It helped them from the come down. It helped with the hangover. It helped to warm, freezing, frightened bones who'd stayed awake the whole night from the terror of what awaits on your suburban streets when you're sleeping safely and soundly, and the security guards have chased everyone away. Those things matter. Geography, space, and buildings. They really do matter. Do you know your neighbor? Do you know the homeless people in your streets, the bin pickers? Do you know the sex workers? Do you know the trans child who had to leave home and is now living on the streets because they were thrown out by their parents? When we ask the questions about who are we and why are we here, we're here to be the hands and feet of Jesus if we are people of faith. And to be quite honest, I've met a whole bunch of people who wouldn't identify themselves as Christians who do this work out of just the simple goodness of their hearts. And I hang my head in shame when I think about it, because what we've done is we've outsourced our stuff, right? A friend of mine tells this incredible story. He used to work with refugees. And a guy went back to his home country. He was gone for 9 months. They used to go to church together. He came back and he phoned my friend. He said, the church is gone. They've built a hotel in its place. They hadn't. They'd built a new building. But the simple architecture of the building intimidated him to the point that he wasn't willing to go through the door. These things matter. We must ask ourselves questions when churches want to build new buildings and throw pennies to the poor. We must ask these questions. But, the good news is we get to outsource everything, right? We get to employ people like me who are overqualified and underpaid. It's always got to go there, right? Giving money doesn't make you a better person. Living out the Beatitudes of Jesus is how we interact with the world and how we engage the world that surrounds us. We need to move on from serving the poor towards a unified movement for a shared liberation. If we do not believe that our liberation is wrapped up in one another, we have no business calling ourselves people of faith at this particular juncture in human history. Jesus, Paul, and TBN. So my friend told me this amazing story. And he said to me, a lot of my friends in Khayelitsha think that the white church worships Paul. Because every time I've been to a white church, I've heard Paul preached. Now that is a pretty humbling thought. So that's one of the things I want to talk about, is our dominant theologies exist within different sectors of society. Move on to the second point. Many churches hold sway with a Cold War outlook on their theologies. Everything is either communist or everything is socialist. I have heard that more times than I care to remember, and it is obscene. That's why when we go to Bible colleges, if the college that your child or you go to teaches like a 3-day or 3-week tract on liberation, black theology, we have to start asking some questions if you're mainly reading white people in Africa. It's just not on. By the same token, Jesus was not a capitalist. Jesus was not a socialist. Jesus believed in the beloved community, and that calls people out to live out the Beatitudes together with one another, fearlessly. Stop sidestepping Jesus by quoting Paul all the time. Most people are not interested because the reality is Paul was written in a context, and you cannot continue to just keep going on about Paul and ignoring Jesus, and that happens way more often than we realize. When Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ," he wasn't making it up to try and sell you his own version of dogma. So finally, and I've got this really big Bible behind me, which is intimidating me a little bit. Because the Bible tells me so, is something that I think we hear way too often. So there's a dinosaur holding a cross, and 2 archaeologists say, "We tell no one." The truth is, for most people of faith, we're one archaeological or scientific discovery away from having to explain ourselves pretty seriously. And that's an uncomfortable, unpleasant, and unpopular opinion. But it's reality. Science and archaeology move on. It's time that Christians did. I saw this quote today, and it was on Dion Foster from the University of Stellenbosch. It said this: "Christianity provides the software that allows the hardware of injustice to function in society." So I'm going to say that again. Christianity provides the software that allows the hardware of injustice to function in society. I want to add to that. If you are a person of faith, may you choose to be the malware that disrupts the software. May you choose to be the malware that says future generations no longer need to live like this. Future generations of Christians can look like Jesus. And finally, thank you. And please remember, making statements and asking questions are not the same thing. In my very long life, the one thing I have come to realize is that Christians are really good at making statements and really crap at asking questions because they've got used to being the dominant voice. Society is changing. The church is changing. And I don't know if people are ready for it. And I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. If we're going to make the invisible visible, we need to decide who we are.